Welcome to the Writer's Realm podcast. Join us as we journey through writing together. We're your hosts. I'm Holly Rebillard.
I'm Bob Dotto.
And I'm Austin Matthews.
And today we're going to talk about all things Halloween and horror. So I guess let's start out by talking about what our favorite story is. Bob, do you want to start us off?
No, I'm just playing. Yes, of course I do. Favorite. Yeah, this is a Halloween episode, spooky stuff. So my pick for favorite horror story or spooky themed is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Written in 1959, this book surprised the heck out of me. I don't know why. This is my stupidity, thinking well, it's 1959. What could be spooky back then? What were they afraid of? Well, this book, I remember the end of one chapter, I had trouble going to sleep. And that was just me. It just kind of grabbed me by my throat, and I was like, oh my gosh. But yeah, it just made such an impression on me. I still remember all those different points throughout the book. And more, I should reread that again for Halloween, just for spooky sakes. So that was my pick.
That's awesome. I think that they don't really give enough credit anymore to a lot of the classics. I think there is nothing scarier. If you look at some of those Halloween costumes and stuff that kids used to wear with just a sack with just these dark, empty eyes, I think that's more terrifying than half of the stuff you see on TV anymore. It's crazy.
Yeah, and what makes it worse is it's a black and white picture, and that's why would the lack of color make it more creepy? But
absolutely.
It works.
Yeah. What about you, Austin?
It was funny. I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain about my favorite horror story, but I'm literally in the middle of re-listening to the Magnus Archives, which is a horror anthology podcast, and it takes you for a roller coaster ride. And even the things that it talks about that I'm not afraid of, it has a way of making me afraid of them, which is so fantastic.
Huh.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think for me, I actually got into this. My dad is a big Stephen King guy, and you can't talk about horror unless someone brings up Stephen King. So I'm going to do it. Needful Things for me is, I love it. I know we're going to get into talking about what makes a good scary story, but this one for me, I love it because it's just a slow burn. I love when I'm sitting there and I'm reading it, and there's not anything in particular that's really scary, but it's just a combination of things. And you're sitting there and suddenly there's you get this chill and you have pins and needles going down your back and your hair stands up on end. And it's nothing is really jumping out at you that's terrifying, but it's just a slow burn that something is coming and you don't know when it's coming. It just absolutely freaks me out and I love it.
Well, there you go. Lots of different scary things out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's really good at what he does. Anytime you're going to talk about horror, it's going to be Stephen King, usually at the top of the list. He knows what he's doing. Yeah,
and I mean, and kind of it's really interesting is that the book does a really good parallel to how society is, right? They're all greedy, and so it's he's kind of got two stories going on there. What people are like in reality, and he does a great job of showing how that can terrify people. So that's my pick.
Yeah.
And I think on that note, what you're talking about, this kind of starts to get into what makes a good horror story, but just the idea of the way that Stephen King in particular makes the characters so relatable, I feel like it's just such a key component of it, because it's I can feel their horror. So it's not just the situation that is scary to me. I am connected to them. They're afraid, so I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as far as what makes a good horror scary story, yeah, it's definitely some relatable fears. I mean, I have kids, they're adults now, but I remember some other writer mentioned what would make a good horror story. Sometimes you think of monsters or we'll get into all that. But what if you got out of you parked your car, your kid's in the back seat, you just got out to get a newspaper, and you turn around and your kid's gone. Well, that's horror right there. You know what I mean? And that's super relatable. If somebody you love and you're connected to, and you're this is who you're supposed to protect and provide for, and all of a sudden they're in immediate danger, and that's horrible, right? But yeah, but as far as like the Haunting of Hell House, it was a lady. I can't remember the name of the actual character, but she's just one person that gets invited out to this supposedly haunted house, and they're just there to investigate and just to test it out and see what's really going on there. And she's not expecting much. She just wants to get out of the house, and that's pretty relatable. Like she's cooped up with her, I think it was a sister and brother-in-law, and she just wants out of their house, and she just wants to go try. That sounds nice, to go like a cabin in the woods kind of a deal, just to get out. And that's something most of us can relate to. And what happens is, it's just page by page, she starts kind of spiraling deeper into the house itself, and kind of whatever is going on in the house, which you don't really ever see necessarily, but it's there. It's known that it's there. There's something going on. They just don't know what. And eventually, I'm not going to spoil anything, but anyway, it sounds like pretty. I wouldn't mind. I just spent a week out in a condo in Utah, and that was nice. I wanted to get out, but like I could just imagine if like, hey, I didn't leave that door open, or it's just something like that. So those are little things that can make a good scary story. But yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I would just say I absolutely agree with that. I recently read a novel, and in it, this young woman had a stalker. And so she would look outside of her window at night, and he would be standing out there. And she would just see him out in the yards, in the, just inside of the shadows, but she could see him, and he was smoking. So she could see like the cherry off of his cigarette. And he would just stand there watching her. And it progressed a little bit to the point where she knew he had been in her house, but she didn't see him in the house. And it just absolutely freaked me out, because, you like, that's something that could happen to you in real life. Yeah. And so that, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, like, do I need to go lock my windows before I finish this chapter? I think I do.
Gosh, that'd be horrible. But yeah, that's what we want to do as writers. We want to like create this environment that really connects the reader like emotionally and locks them in to where they're at, in the book, just like parallel with the characters in the book. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like as soon as you start getting, as a writer, if you can find a way to get someone's nervous system going, or that, that fight or flight response, then that is just golden, because that's the one thing that people can't, even if you know better, you have to work really hard to try and suppress those things. Yeah. So
yeah. And it's funny, especially like reading horror. It's like, I could close this book at any time I wanted and walk away, but it's like you're so locked in it. It's like you forget that you're in the process of reading this, and you're just so dialed into where the author is and what they're bringing you through. And it's like you're saying, like getting that nervous system going. I think as an author, like I think it was one of the creators of the Madness Archive that was talking about it, and he was like, if your spine is not tingling at least a little bit while you're writing it, then it could probably be scarier. Like we as writers should be scared of these things, because it's about writing what you know. And if you're not scared, then you're probably not scaring other people with it.
I think I saw, and forgive me if I get this wrong, I can't quite remember how the quote goes, but like when the author cries, the reader's going to cry, right? When I think it was a Robert Frost. I think it was a quote by him. But like, yeah, when we pour our emotions onto the page, that's what's going to happen on the other side. And it's really neat. It's really magic, because that last book I wrote this big sad scene, and it was grabbing me emotionally. I had tears. And then I gave it to my father-in-law to read, and I watched him outside. And I'm sorry for laughing. It's not funny, but I was like, wow, he's crying too. I know what he's reading right now. He's reading that scene. Because he was like, he had tears coming down his cheek, and I'm like, oh, right on. So yeah, we just have this we're writers. We have this magical power, man. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I think you have to really get into it. So, if you really want to get yourself freaked out and get everyone freaked out when you're writing, take your laptop or your writing pad or whatever, and sit with your back to an open window at nighttime and write a scene.
Right.
It'll be great, I promise.
Yeah, that's true. Just kind of put yourself into that, right? Light some candles maybe, or one candle.
Listen for noises, because as soon as you start listening for a noise in your house, there's going to be noises that were never there before. Write about them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too. Is just like drawing from our everyday. Like, I mean, I think the one of the silliest things I've ever had happen to me was I was out camping and I decided silly, like I was foolish. I slept in the hammock and I woke up in the middle of the night to something breathing in my ear.
Ugh.
Horrifying.
That's
Because I'm like,
awful.
what is this?
No
And I mean,
thanks.
you know, I just sat there still until it went away, and it turns out it was a deer, which I mean, it's kind of cool, but at the same time, it could have been anything. And just like taking that and like as a writer, like latching onto that and being like, but what else could it have been?
Yeah.
And so just like really, you know, playing up the creepy pasta of everyday life.
Absolutely. I obviously I don't write horror, but I did have this really weird experience. And so I went ahead and actually wrote a short story about this weird, creepy experience that I had, and I just recently submitted it. But basically what had happened was I had moved into this house that had been, it was like the house that I moved into was a bankruptcy house or something. And so the people who lived there before had left the house and left everything in it. So when I went through this house, it was like a buy it as it is. And so there was stuff everywhere. There was old furniture, old records just thrown across the floor on all levels of the house. It was just an absolute mess. But it was very lived in. And I could have sworn one day I was out in the yard and I turned around and I saw this gentleman out in the yard just out of the corner of my eye, and he was wearing plaid. And I just kind of startled myself, and it just, kind of freaked me out, but it must have stuck with me because, fast forward, like, 6 months down the road, and I'm laying in bed one night and I swear I woke up in the middle of the night and I just, because I had felt someone or something had like brushed through my hair as I was sleeping. And as I was opening my eyes, I just had this image of this same man standing beside my bed in this plaid. And it absolutely just like, I don't know that I believe in ghosts and stuff like that. It must have just been stuck somewhere back in my subconscious because, man, it just freaked me out. And it made for a great story because I could relive how that felt. Like that second that I woke up and thought somebody was in my room, but there was nobody there. Oh my gosh. And it just, those are the experiences. Even the little ones, right? Like take it and run with it.
Yeah. I think that's a good point about being in a place of vulnerability. You're nowhere as vulnerable as when you're asleep. You're supposed to be safe. All the doors and windows are secured. You're tucked in bed, got the covers on, and you're at peace enough to go, I know I'm safe, I can go to sleep. And then that's when it happens, right? You hear a noise, or even the very horrible experience of some fingers going through your hair. Good Lord, that would be the creepiest, man. Like, that's not cool. But so now all of a sudden, like, well, crap, I'm not safe now. What the heck,
Yeah, absolutely. And those little descriptions, like that's something everyone knows what that feels like.
Right.
You just, what that light little touch feels like.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think too, like kind of bridging the gap between like our everyday experiences and those things, but then also bringing it back to the whole Stephen King thing is like what he does so well as like on top of the character stuff is that he takes everyday objects and is like, how can I twist the way that we interact with this in order to make you scared of it? Because you have to interact with it all the time. And like every time I see, up high, I somehow still think of thinner. Like there's all these little things that like throughout my day, even jokingly, like I think it was Family Guy made fun of him and he was like, ooh, scary lamp. But I still think of Stephen King whenever I see like an old style lamp because of that joke.
Yeah, so I can't even look at dentures anymore without thinking of chattery teeth.
Gosh, that's awful.
Nobody's safe.
No, that's pretty much
inanimate objects are not inanimate anymore.
Yeah. I think that's the point
me that
of horror, right? Yeah, that's the point of these horror stories, right? Is like you're not safe, well, we're going to make our characters not safe, and then that in turn is going to make you, feel the same way, right? Yeah, we're not safe. So
yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, and that's the best part about writing is that you can have your character freaked out by a monster. They can be freaked out by a regular person. They can be freaked out even by a family member. It just depends on, what actions you put them through or what the situation is. Sometimes the character or the monster themselves is scary. Sometimes it can be the setting that's scary. Yeah. It can be the lead up to it. I think that there's just so many different things and so many ways that you can bring that horror into a story.
Yeah, and now that you said that, the lead in I feel like is always the scariest part for me. Like that buildup is just like, it's so tense, and it's like nothing may have happened yet, and I'm like already on edge. I remember going to see, what was it, The Last Rite with Anthony Hopkins. It's an Exorcist movie,
Hmm.
and I was like, man, I can't go see an Exorcist movie with Anthony Hopkins in it. I just can't. Like,
Hello,
I cannot
Clarice.
see that man. Exactly, that man possessed, not doing it. But then I was like, I saw the trailer and I was like, oh, he's the priest, I'm fine. Well, lo and behold, turns out I'm not fine because he's possessed anyways. Sorry for the spoiler, but it scares me. He's too good at being scary.
Oh yeah, he's perfect for it. It's funny.
So that brings me to the question then, how do you guys feel about actually seeing a monster, whether it's in a movie or whether it's in a novel? How do you feel about actually the moment when you find out what the monster is?
The reveal.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel like it takes away from the horror or the scariness of the situation once you know what it is that's causing all of these feelings? Or do you think that just makes it even worse because now you can see what it is that's causing all these terrifying emotions?
Right. Because sometimes it can explain everything, and you kind of don't want that. Sometimes the mystery of it is fun. It can be fun and frightening, and you're not really sure. Especially like those really good books where, was there like a killer next door, or is this lady just imagining all this, and maybe she's the killer, or something like that. Like, I'm sorry to say, American Psycho was a little bit like that. Like, at the end, you're just kind of like, well, wait a second, did he really do all this, or is he just imagining all this? It's just kind of a, like, what do they call that? Where the narrator, you're not really trusting
the
the
unreliable
narrator.
narrator.
Unreliable narrator. But so I don't know if there's going to be a monster. The way, I mean, I've definitely thought of horror stories, writing them, and I almost would rather it be vague. That's me. I would rather. I know it depends on the story and everything. Like, say, Alien. It wasn't a book, but it was a movie. That's a great space horror movie.
That's fair.
And you see it, and it's kind of like, cool. That looked way too cool. Like, no, it's good. I wanted to see that. But sometimes I just prefer the vagueness of the shadow. I'm sorry to mention another movie. It wasn't horror necessarily. No Country for Old Men. There's a scene, a very long scene, where Anton Chigurh, who's the antagonist of the story, is kind of like hunting one of the main characters, and all he is a shadow, and I love that about him. All you see is the shadow moving, and that's all he was, and it was like kind of like the embodiment of death in a way. Like, this guy is just, that's all he is. He's going to kill you. So if he's kind of like a shadowy, vague character, I kind of would enjoy that. I prefer that.
Yeah, I would say on my end, I think that 80% of the time it gets worse whenever whatever the source is revealed, and maybe 1% of the time it gets better. It's just so infrequently that it's like actually seeing it makes me more afraid. I think that part of it is that, like, our minds are wired to freak us out. It's a survival mechanism to be afraid and to have that, fight or flight trigger in us.
Right.
And so, like, whatever I can come up with is probably better than whatever, string of words is going to get thrown on that page that is what they thought was the most horrible thing, as opposed to what I think. And that specificity to that, focused on the actual thing, the source, kind of does away with it. But a lot of cosmic horror, because they know they can't get that quite right, focuses on the vagueness of the creature and focuses more on the actual horror that is going on in the mind of the characters. And I think that side of things is a better source for horror for me.
Yeah. I always sorry, I always think of, like, I love the classics. I love those old wives' tales and stuff. And I always think of the story about the kids in the car, and they hear the hook coming along the car, right? And so you can describe, like, hearing the hook, or I think that at one point they hear something dripping on the top of the car, or they see that scrape, and at the end they get so freaked out just from describing it, right? And they never actually see who the hook is attached to, but they see, I think, in different variations. In one variation they saw the hook. But I almost feel like not knowing, like, you can describe it as if it is a hook, or if it's a sharp this or it's that, but knowing that it's a hook to me, like knowing that, oh yeah, it's a guy who, you know, has a hook for a hand and he's doing it. That to me is
Right.
like a little bit less scary than it is just to
Yeah.
think about what it could be, because it could be so much worse. It could be so much worse than you could possibly think that it could be. But once you know what it is, then it's like, I mean, I think I can deal with that, right?
I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's a good
Human
point.
beings might be the scariest thing that's out
Yes.
there.
Yes, they are actually. Yeah. Jack Ketchum. I was just reading about this kind of doesn't have a monster, sort of, but like The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum was based on a true story about a murder of a girl by the next door neighbor's mother, and it was like horrific, and that's scared the crap out of me because like you said, they're actually, it's an actual person, right? Like they're,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know, and they're all over we have neighbors all over the place, you know. You say, hey, what's up, and you don't know what goes on behind that door. It could be normal people just like you, or they could be some serial killer or whatever. And that's a whole different scary vibe.
Yeah, I think even for me, especially, it's hard to do in novels, obviously, but when it comes to movies, what always gets me is something popping out. And I love when something is supposed to pop out and then it doesn't, right? You don't get that
Mhm.
jump scare, like you think it's coming. And I think one of the Paranormal Activity movies years and years and years ago was the first one that really did this for me, because it had gotten to the point where everyone was like, all right, you know it's coming, and bam, yep, there it is, it pops out, and you know that it's coming. And then there was this scene where this family had set up a camera on top of their fan, and so it was oscillating, and it's scanning the room, and you, like, by the third time you're like, oh, this is gonna be it, and it wasn't. And then it just goes a little bit more, and it goes a little bit more, and just when you're like, okay, they're playing me, it's not going to happen, it happens. You know, and just like things like that I love, because for me it's that jump scare, right? And yeah, love it.
Now, was that something that they showed the monster? I never really saw that movie, so I don't know.
Well, that movie actually, I think it ends up being a possession. So it's the one of the spouses or something that had become possessed. But when all this was going on, you never see a person. It's like things are happening, like you know, all of a sudden a door slams, or the cupboards all of a sudden, all of them fly open, and things like that. So it's just something that's just loud that just pops out at you. And I love that.
Yeah.
Probably gonna die young because of it, but I love it.
Yeah. Well, and like you saying that about like the timing of that just reminds me that there is such an interesting correlation between comedy and horror. And so they fill a lot of the same roles, and they have a lot of the same requirements of like this idea of like the timing has to be perfect, or, you know, the scare isn't going to work and the joke isn't going to land. And then I also feel like they, you know, have a tendency to like be, you know, opposite sides of the same coin, but in the same story, I feel like that moment of like comedy, like lets me take a breath and like is a palate cleanser, and then you can get hit even harder with the next horrible thing.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, House on Haunted Hill was definitely a slow burn. There was no jump scares. There's very creepy, like, oh my gosh. So maybe it was kind of maybe a couple of jump scares in there, but most of it was just this slow, like, oh no, what's happening to this lady? What is going on? Why is she thinking like this? You know what I mean? So it's just kind of a progressing horror. You know what I mean? Another really favorite movie of mine, The Others. That was a horror. That was a very slow burn with like I don't think that had any jump scares.
Yeah, I feel like that was almost more like, yeah, if it barely felt like horror, but like obviously it is, but like, yeah, it's just such an interesting movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thinking of haunted houses, that brings me to my next thought. Common horror tropes. I know haunted houses are a big one. What are the other ones that you guys kind of think of? I know obviously there's ways to work around those tropes. I mean, what is a scary story without a scary house? Of course. But what's some other ones that you guys can think of that are worth reading about or worth writing about?
I mean, I think the classic of, you know, if you're in the dark, you have to have your flashlight die. Classic. And if it's set in the modern era, for some, like, you have to have some way that the cell phone doesn't work, because that's part of a horror movie, is like you have to be isolated. It doesn't work if they're not isolated. because if I can just call the cops and they show up, like unless the cops are suddenly like in the mix of like being hunted and stuff, like just to show how, you know, intense things are. But like if there's an out, then it's not scary.
Right.
Yeah,
I
that's true.
I like The Mist was kind of a military science gone wrong, where apparently supposedly they're working on something. Nobody knows. The little town next to this army base didn't know what was going on there. They know that there's some shenanigans. This was written short story written by Stephen King. But all of a sudden, like this mist is just pouring out of that area, and then from the mist were all these monsters. So I could totally see uh, I feel like that's the most realistic horror, is when we're working on something, scientists or another good one was 28 Days Later, where they're working on I don't know, some sort of rage, I don't know, hormone or something, and then that goes nuts. The movie I Am Legend was super different than the book, than the short story. But that was another one where science goes wrong, where, in the movie they said, yeah, we cured cancer, and all of a sudden, like 3 years later, everyone's gone and dead. So I feel like those are very, very, like we're expecting that almost, and unfortunately, the way our culture is right now, it's, we're kind of a distrust of government and therefore science, unfortunately. But I can see that happen.
Yeah, and then thinking about 28 Days Later, just the classic monsters, so like zombies, or I Am Legend, I guess they were kind of vampire, like I don't know, they were a weird zombie, vampires. So just the classic monsters, like you can't go wrong. But I've even just was reading the Vampire Lestat, and I got like 2 sentences in, and the way that his skin was described, I just instantly thought of sparkling vampires, because it was like it like was talking about how it shines in the sunlight, and I was like, oh, well, it's not completely just Twilight.
That's not bad.
Yeah. The big one for me is always mirrors. Anytime I see like a mirror or something in a horror movie, or even in the book that I was reading recently, they talked about the girl looking in the mirror and thinking she's seeing someone behind her. And I'm like, I know for a lot of people that can actually be terrifying, because you never know if your mind's going to play tricks on you and you're going to see something or not. But it drives me crazy, and now every time I see a mirror coming in a movie, I'm like, oh, great, here we go. Like someone's going to be in it. Look out.
You just expect it, right?
Yeah. But the one thing that actually gets me freaked out is, if you like hang up a towel in the corner of your room, or like a robe, or like a sweater or something, and you're not used to seeing it there, and you wake up in the middle of the night and you look over, and the light is coming in just right, and all of a sudden you see this freaking shadow that's not normally there.
Oh gosh. Now, no joke, my wife did this to me a few nights ago. We have these I made her these blanket ladders, so they're just like small ladders, like 4 or 5 feet tall. And you lean them up against the wall and you hang a bunch of blankets on them, on the rungs. Well, she put one over next to my bed, and I'm just not, like you said, you're just used to, you open your eyes, you look around, and and every time I'm opening my eyes out, there's this huge, like weird shape over in the corner of my room. Of course, it has to be in the corner, but it's like right next to me. I'm just like, okay, what the heck is that? And I'm like, is that like the dogs that's sitting up on bed, or what the heck? What am I looking at? But yeah, I know exactly what that is.
I think something that could work really well in a novel as well is that if you describe something and you have a setting, and the setting is the same over and over until one time it's not. And what I mean by this, I have this, oh my gosh, I'm fortunate enough to live in a neighborhood that goes all out for Halloween. There's someone who lives a few houses down from me who actually parks an old van in his front yard, and he fills it with this like scene of zombies, and there's like a chainsaw murderer, and all these like lights and fog, and everything's going on. And I walk by this house every day in October because I love looking at it. And I see it every day. And, at this point it's cool. It all looks the same. And one day I walked by it, and as I was walking by, the guy had been inside of it doing some work and came out of it at just the time that I was walking by. I thought I was going to die on the spot, because I was so, I'd almost become like desensitized to it, because I've seen the same thing over and over and over, until suddenly there's a person coming out of it.
Oh
Uh,
man, that reminds me of
yeah.
this story, if I can share, from back in the days when I used to be in patrol. It's like 2:30 in the morning, okay, and there's like this mist. You know, we're right next to San Diego Bay, so there's during, I mean, almost all summer there's always going to be some sort of a heavy mist, and I'm like, I don't want to get out of the car, but I'm trying to wake up because I'm falling asleep. So I get out and I'm walking around this park, and I see this. It looks like a mattress bag. You know, a mattress bag is like, it's clear, it's huge, you know, and it's all rolled up. The first thing I think of is like, oh my God, somebody's wrapped up in this. Like somebody just dumped a body over here next to this tree. And I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the flashlight. I can't see through it because it's so wrapped up, you know. Um, and I'm like, okay, I'll just kick it, you know, just make sure. I really don't want it. I don't want anything solid in here, right? So I kind of give myself a little count. Here I am, like fully armed, fully trained for whatever, and so I go, okay, I'm gonna kick it. And right when I like pull my foot back, two cats over here start fighting. I don't know if you've ever heard cats like these guys go nuts, and it freaked the crap out of me, man. Like, oh God. I was like, oh my God, I just like left. There could have been a body in there. I don't know. I just left. I'm like, no, forget it. I'm going back to my car. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I had to show that fun stuff.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's kind of nice too when you have your focus on one thing and then it's something that you're totally not expecting, right? You're expecting this to move, or you know, something is supposed to happen with this here, but then when something happens over there, it's like totally throws you off. Your brain is not ready for that.
Yeah. That work well with mirrors, right? When you're like ready to, you expect something in there, it doesn't happen, but then the character goes around like, oh, how silly, there was nothing there, and all of a sudden there's, you know, somebody around the corner or something like that, or, you know, yeah, that could work really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the important thing, right? As writers, is to take those tropes and twist them or do something different with them in a way that is going to be a little bit fresh and unsuspecting for readers, especially when it comes to horrors. But aside from the obvious, what can you tell me scares you as an author, as a writer? Aside from everything.
Everything. Huh. Oh, I know what. I don't know. Yeah, at first it was editing, honestly, because I don't know what the process is. I'm sure we'll have a great episode on editors, and we can talk to an editor and find out exactly what they do. But you just kind of, as a writer, you just have this thing like, well, I'm going to spend, you know, months, years writing this. And an editor is just going to take his red marker and just slash it all up and just tell me like, or even worse, like, why, please, you know, break your keyboard in half and burn this, you know, stack of pages for me or something like that. I think that's what we fear as writers, because some of us have thin skin and we don't know how to take some good critical judgment. Fortunately for me, being a cop, I have super thick skin. I have like rhino armor, so I'd rather learn, you know, the best way. But yeah, I think editing was, and it didn't turn out like that at all. I mean, I found a fantastic editor, super helpful, very, very knowledgeable, helped me write a better book. I think if we change our perceptions on what the editing process is, then it quells a lot of fears, you know, that as we can relax, we're fine. You know, they see new writers pretty much every day. I'm sure somebody new comes up and says, hey, what do you think about this? Or how can you help me with this? But yeah, that'd be my pick.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I would have said, you know, the blank page is terrifying. Just trying to figure out what to do with it. But at this point, I feel like I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm like, I'm afraid of like time. Time is running out. Like there's only so much time in the day, in my year, in my life. And like I already have so many things that I want to say and so many things I want to write. And it's just like, I don't know, like I have, I think 70 something books that I'm hoping to write. Like there's not time. So I had to like pick and choose. and like I have to be the person that chooses which one of those die. So what ends up on the cutting room floor, basically. So
Like your own editor.
hmm yeah,
Wow.
I'm my own worst nightmare.
Yeah, your own worst horror story.
Gosh, yeah. I think for me, it's the, and this is probably a really stupid fear to have. Um, but for me, I'm always worried that I'm going to get something written down and I'm going to get through like a whole novel. And then there's just going to be either not enough excitement in it or not enough twists and turns in it, that I'm going to have to go back through and add so many more things. And I'm always worried that when I do that, that I'm going to lose faith in the book. I'm going to lose faith in my ability. And I'm going to just not be able to, I'm just going to take this book that I already think is good. And then when I have to go back through and add things, it's just going to kind of lose some of that magic along the way. Almost like you're patching something up, right? I guess that's a good way to put it, is that I feel like, it's suddenly going to become like one of those, those creepy horror movies where there's like a person that's got all these little patches here of like different body parts from different people. And I'm like terrified that that's what my book is going to come like turn into. When you just have to constantly go back and add bits and pieces. But I think that's completely irrational to think that way, because that is what we do as writers, right? We go back, the first draft, get it down on paper, and then you go back and you add those body parts in there. You patch it all up. So I think that's just something that comes with time and with writing. And again, with me being a new writer, that's just, I think, all part of the process.
100%. But I will say that as you began, I had a visceral reaction, because you're like, oh, when you get all the way through the book, I thought you were going to be like, and the file somehow gets erased. And I was like, biggest fear.
Oh, yes. Where did it go? Why is it gone? Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. As you know, my laptop likes to just have a fit and shut itself down sometimes. So that is something that terrifies me. I actually have a similar experience with my computer. And sometimes I'll work on one computer and then I'll switch to another computer. And I don't know what happened. I like to work on Word. And I had done like pages and pages and pages on one computer. And then I switched to the other one. And my file somehow reverted back to the file that had barely anything there on both computers. And I was having like a mild heart attack. I'm like, oh my God, something's wrong. Where did it all go? It was absolutely terrifying. And thankfully, I managed to get it back. But it was absolutely horrifying.
Right.
Yeah, I will say that like I've had a few issues with, because I use a lot of Google Docs, and I've had some issues at times where it's like, I don't know if the internet was not good where I was writing or what happened, but like I would get all the way through a chapter or a scene and then it wouldn't save properly. And I like opened it up the next day and I was like, oh no, it's not there. And I'm just like, well, I guess we're rewriting it, hoping that it was part of a natural editing process. And I've had time to like stew on it and make it better.
Yeah.
It is. It's like you see that little circle going and it's like no, and then like no internet connection pops up and you're like,
oh gosh.
Oh God,
like, let me open up Word real quick.
Where
and
can I save
it somewhere else?
Oh my gosh.
Like you go to hit file save and it's like everything freezes. It's like it's not responding. Please wait.
Oh my gosh. You're right. Now that because I write using Google Docs, and that would be my horror, to log in to Google, and like there's no Google Docs icon, like it does. Oh, we got rid of Google Docs because it takes up, and I'd be like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna go.
It's
jump
a sinkhole of money for us. No more Google Docs. Sorry, guys.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That would be horrible. What, you guys are freaking me out.
Elon Musk bought Google and then decided to shut down.
Yeah, there you go. We don't need this anymore. Google's gonna be called Google Z now.
No, just Y, and then he has to own another company and call it Z. We gotta get it the whole.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking of is imposter syndrome. You guys deal with that, where you just self-doubt, like, God, so I'm gonna write this and somebody's gonna say, you know what, man, you don't know what you're writing about, do you? God, that would be the worst. Now I picked steampunk as my first genre writing, so I won't get too many people saying, but there's definitely like some research. Like I have to look at what other people have written and just some examples of what steampunk is, and usually during the Victorian or the Edwardian era, and just kind of get a feel for that genre. But yeah, that would that would suck. But I also have had I don't really I think it's like a wall we can jump over, and hopefully you only have to do it the one time. Like, because I
Hmm.
don't experience imposter syndrome anymore, but I definitely used to writing my first book.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's just like this overarching sense that, I'm going to present my book like to the editor, or finally maybe somebody reads it. That would be the worst. Like, I'm at a book signing and like, hey, I just read your book, and like, I couldn't even finish this stupid thing. You know what I mean? Like, and you're just like, wow, you
Yeah.
know.
They have to really hate it to show up to a book signing, though.
Yeah, but you do know who I am, though, don't you? That's what I was
Yeah.
gonna say, like from Jack Sparrow,
Yeah, for sure. And
Pirates.
I would say that like that's a probably a super common fear, like, but I think that's also a productive fear. Like I feel like it makes us strive to be better and to know our like if we don't give up, it makes us strive to know what we're doing better. Like you said, you had to go and do research. Like I tend to write fantasy, so I don't have to worry about people going, well, that's not how things actually were. And it's like, well, actually, it is. But
Right.
like I do the same thing because like I love to have my fantasy grounded in physics. And so I'm like sitting there like, okay, well, like my planet's like this size is how do I have roughly Earth size, like Earth's gravity? And I'm like doing all this research. I'm like, well, basically, if it had a pure iron core, it'd have to spin so fast it would melt the entire planet. And I'm like, well, it's a fantasy world. It's fine. So like you have to just kind of let go of some things too.
Yeah, that's really true. I know it's really funny sometimes when I'll send out some of my stuff for people to look at, or even just friends to look at. They'll come back and be like, "Oh, well, they wouldn't have coffee back then," or I'm like, "It's a fantasy novel. If I want them to have
Yeah,
coffee, there will be coffee."
of course I
Like,
will.
Back when this isn't Earth,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
Middle Earth.
yeah. I remember reading a Star Wars book, Kevin J. Anderson. I don't remember which one it was, but Lando Calrissian was drinking something exotic from a faraway place called hot chocolate. Or the drink was a hot chocolate. So they threw that in there. Usually, it's going to be something you never heard of, but I thought that was clever. But yeah, so you can write. It's your book. It's your story. You write whatever you want in there. Don't worry.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you feel? I'm just now that we're kind of talking about horror today and Halloween. How do you feel about sprinkling a little bit of horror into a non-horror novel?
Yes, I do. In fact, mine is science fiction, steampunk. But he was really, I should say he, it was they. It was like 3-star review, and they're like, man, this was like so. It wasn't boring, but it was like you just knew what was going to happen. It wasn't a scathing review, but he's the only one that said, or they are the only one that said, this shouldn't be this shouldn't be a science fiction genre. This should be in the horror genre. So they mislabeled that, and I took that as like a star for me. I'm like, wow, that's true. Actually, I do have a lot of horror in there. Thank you very much for that. Like, I like that. So now in my when I go into my not a Kindle, what is it? My KDP bookshelf. I mean, I can rearrange keywords and stuff like that. So now I include horror in there, so it catches some attention. So I'm all for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, me too. So like one of my current work in progress, like the inciting incident of like the hero's journey is that like his entire city gets massacred and turned into zombies. So I'm like, I'm all there for horror in my fantasy novels.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to like at least I love horror because it's because that it's tension and it builds up a lot of the horror that I like. It's suspenseful to get to what's scary, and I think that that's something just every book needs to have, right? Because that's how you're going to keep your readers. So I'm all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's definitely a correlation between the idea of horror and just stakes in general.
Yeah.
So I think it's super necessary if we want to care about what's happening in the climax that we are scared. So
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, is there anything else you guys can think of that we should touch on here?
How about like, what's the point of horror? Why do we have horror books? Why do we need them? I mean, it's easily top 5 in the genres, best-selling genres. So why do we, I don't know. Yeah, why do we like horror, I guess, right? Why do we pick up that book? Why did I pick up House on Haunted Hill? You know?
Yeah, it's interesting because my wife and I just went and saw the new Hercule Poirot movie. What is it, Haunting in Venice?
Hmm.
And like it's literally a part of the thing. And like the opening sequence of the mystery is that they have like a scary story for the orphan children.
Hmm.
And Poirot's like, isn't this too scary for the children? And they're like, no, the horror of this makes real like the everyday life less scary.
Hmm.
And I was like,
Yes. Yep.
I've never really thought about that. But like I thought that was a fascinating perspective of like, my life's not that bad. I'm not being, actively, murdered or, possessed, or no alien facehugger has like attacked me lately. So I'm doing pretty all right.
My life's pretty good.
Yeah, I really like it. I like it for two reasons. So the first reason that I love it, especially around Halloween, is because it makes kids get so excited. And I love that in our neighborhood. We have so many kids around. There's a church down the road that does a lot of like Halloween gatherings and stuff like that. And I love when I walk by it and I just hear kids in there and they are absolutely screaming. And it might make me a terrible person, but I just love that. It just, because they're just fully embracing what's scary. And I really, really like that. And for me, I personally really love horror because I feel like when you get absolutely terrified, scared out of your mind about something and you have that jump, like you get that suspense, that build up, you have that jump, and then you're like, oh, like it's just almost relaxing to after you have that scare to just be like, oh gosh, there's not someone in my house. It was just the toast popping up in the toaster. Like,
Yeah, it's like cathartic in a way. Like it's like I have all these like small anxieties in my life. And so to be able to pin it all on something else, it's like, oh, okay. Like I'm all relaxed. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of see horror as like, how dark can we get? Either humanity or monsters, from space or whatever it may be. Just how dark can it get? And then adversely, how bright and powerful can our characters be through that darkness? And I'm kind of thinking of Shelob has just bitten Frodo, and and then here comes Sam, and he pulls out the was it the light of Galadriel or the file of Galadriel or something like that? It was had like the light of Evenstar in there, but it was so dark, and that was a little scene of horror, kind of Holly, what you're talking about when you sprinkle horror through there. But yeah, that was definitely, there's this giant spider, they're in this cave, they're lost, they can't get out, and what does he do? So he whips out this big, elven flashlight, as it were. But it just shows like how strong we can be through adversity, right? Just through all the darkness and whatever's attacking us. And it's kind of fun when you're writing this and you have this character that can break through that. I know not all horror is like that. Sometimes, or I should say oftentimes, like it just all goes bad at the end. There's like not a whole lot of happy endings in horror movie or books. But anyway, it's just kind of fun just to see what we're made out of, right? Just to see what a character can be made out of.
Yeah, and that reminds me of as not a huge Shyamalan fan, but the M. Night Shyamalan movie, what was it, Devil? And like that's the whole like moral of it, and like because it's a person telling the story of like the devil coming to Earth and torturing and killing people, and then at the end, she's like the person telling the story is explaining like, hey, but don't be afraid because if the devil is there and the devil is real, then so is the light, so is God. And so it's the idea that like if all these darkness, all this dark of the story is true, then so is the light. And so I think that there's that certain like thing of two opposites having to coexist at the same time. And so like we do get those moments in those things of people being heroic, of the heroic sacrifice and all those things. We get some of the best parts of humanity are exposed in horror.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's like we need to see what's the worst possible thing that can happen to be able to appreciate the things that are good. You never love someone more than when they're about to be murdered in front of your eyes. Tell you what.
was not expecting that.
Wow.
I mean, I guess I wouldn't know.
Yikes, that's scary. Thanks.
But no, that's fair. So
Yeah. Well, if you could give our listeners one piece of advice for sprinkling some horror in or for writing horror, what would that be?
I would say first read a lot. Like if you've never written horror, you're wondering how, if you're reading horror, then you're in a great place. But if you're like fantasy, science fiction or whatever, and you're like, yeah, that sounds like fun, let me give it a try. You need to go do your research. You need to read Stephen King. Who else is it? There's another, there's more than a few horror authors out there. Just the books we talked about. But yeah, you need to kind of just read it and just take note of what freaks you out, what grabs you, what sends the chills across your skin. Is it the scene and the sound of what's going on? Is it the character tentatively approaching a mirror in the dark? Just something like what is it? And just kind of take note of that because I'm pretty sure it's the emotions that hook the readers. It's not just it's not just your magic system, your world building, how many moons are in the sky. It's what our characters are going through while looking at the moons. Let's say Luke Skywalker looking at the twin suns from Tatooine. You could just see that hope that's in his eyes, and I want something bigger. I want something more out of this. You know what I mean? So just pay attention to those emotions while you're reading other people's works, and then now you kind of know what that is. Now you know what the ingredients are, and you can just start writing with your own story. So that'd be my 2 bits.
That's good. On my end, I would say I'm gonna have a dual prong thing. One, journal. Like just throughout your daily life, just write down how you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, what made you feel that way, and then be vulnerable. Because if you can take those real words that you express how you are feeling in that moment and put them into your characters whenever it's appropriate, and that character would be feeling that way, the reader's going to get that and it's going to connect because it's real. And so I think that's one big thing as writers is it's not just our empathy of like putting ourselves in the character's position, but it's really being able to like connect with our readers by putting our own experiences out there. I mean, in little fragments and expanding upon that and all those things. But I think it means a lot whenever you get into those things. I know for me, one of the most impactful moments of any book I ever read was a Brandon Sanderson novel and him talking about the call of the void and this idea of like the temptation of like just ending it. Like, but you could see in that moment, like that was a very real, vulnerable moment. And so like, it's just, those are the things that hit home and, make people really care.
Yeah, absolutely. Just building on that too, I would say, I think a little bit of living your experiences or living the things that you want to talk about. So like I said earlier, sit in front of a window in the dark with your back to the window and just imagine that there's someone watching you through your window, or go for a walk at night and obviously be safe, but go for a walk and just imagine in your mind that there's someone walking behind you. And then as you speed up, they speed up, and just, like you said, write down those feelings. How are you feeling? Is your heart racing? Are you starting to sweat? Are you getting cold? Put your mind in those positions, I guess is a better way to say it. And then, write out those feelings. I think that when you're terrified, you also become hyper aware of things. And so it's things that if you're not afraid in the moment and you're writing about it, you're probably going to notice completely different things than you would if you're terrified.
Yeah.
Right. You might, if you're sitting with your back to a window, you might be able to describe, if you're sitting in a room and looking around the room, you can describe the room. But if you're sitting there with your back to a window, you're going to feel and see things completely differently, right? You're going to see shadows, you're going to hear noises. Maybe you'll get the wind will come blowing by you and you'll get a whiff of, some weird cologne from outside, things like that, right? That when you kind of flip it around and put yourself in that position, I think that you're actually going to get a more realistic experience and you're going to be able to portray that better for your readers.
I think also maybe initially keep your theme really simple, which is pretty easy to do with horror because it's usually something scary. But like say trapped, trapped like Stephen King's Misery. This author was trapped in this bedroom and he couldn't leave. So just keep it really simple. Trapped or stalked. Stalk could be space monster, alien. It could be a clown, killer clown, but we almost know, hopefully not from personal experience, but you kind of know what it feels like to be kind of stuck, like your car breaks down, like, well, great, now what? And so we kind of know what that feels like, so
Yeah.
just keep it really simple. We don't have to go crazy with it. As somebody there, right? Holly, you're talking about that. Is there who just messed with my hair? Is there somebody there, or I'm not unsafe, right? Would be that theme.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be all across the board though, of course. But yeah, that'd be another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I guess that will wrap it up for our Halloween and horror talk. Good luck sleeping tonight, everybody. Hopefully you won't, and then you'll have some really great things to write about tomorrow. Okay. Don't forget to write and subscribe to our channels at the link below so you don't miss any of the Writers Realm content. Next week, we're going to be talking about Nano because we will be coming right up to the beginning of November, and we're going to be diving headfirst into that terrifying 50,000 words that we're all supposed to be hitting.
That's another whole horror of its own.
Horror. Everyone's terrified. We always love to hear from you guys, our listeners. So if you have a question or a topic you want us to dive into, absolutely get in touch at those links below. Till next time.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Bye, y'all.